I've got a friend who he's actually online with us now. His name is Gopal Chandra, and he's 42, and he got cancer, and it's terminal, and he's got about let's get that closed. And he's got, I think, probably a few days or at most a few weeks left to live. And he's got a couple of kids too, both of whom are under the age of 5. And it's been several years he's been coming to terms with this, and he's just at the end now. He's just about to pass away. I just turned 50, so he's almost a decade my junior, and in some ways it's just simply an unmitigated, an absolute tragedy. He's got 2 kids, 4 and 1.5. Neither one of them is going to remember their father. My wife's father died when she was 13, and her younger brother was 5, and he has no memories of his father. You have some couple of memories when you're 3, 4. Anything below 3, it's fabricated memories. They're borrowed memories from photographs and what have you. Other people have told you stuff. But even those memories from 3 and 4 and 5, they're very minimalist. And so he was 5 when her father passed, and he has no memories of spending time with his father. So both these kids are younger than that, and for sure they're not going to remember their dad. It's heavy stuff. He's on the thread with us. You can just think it through. 42. How old are you, Raj Kamud?
49.
Right? It's not that far away. If you're 10, 42 sounds like, oh yeah, I'll be ready to check out by the time I'm 42. But if you're 25 or 30, it's just kind of around the corner. So anyway, to recap, I have a friend. He's an initiated devotee, disciple of Radhanath Maharaj. He's 42 years old, and he'll be passing away from a multi-year battle with cancer in just a few days. He called me yesterday and said, I think it's the end. And we've been talking every day. In fact, I owe him a phone call today. And on behalf of Radhanath Maharaj, and also just out of love for him, I've been counseling him for quite some time now, for some years now, help him get ready. And there was, a lot of potential treatments for cancer, and there's, alternative and allopathic medicine, and at some point it gets to a place where any more treatment is going to reduce your quality of life. And so you have to make this decision to stop treatment, because chemotherapy and radiation is so poisonous to the body that it weakens you. And at some point, you have to, make a decision about the reduced quality of life you have and trying to hold on versus having a little more, presence and strength to wrap up your affairs and say goodbye to your loved ones. So we're past that point. And he's just on death's door. Which puts me in a peculiar situation, because although I've helped a number of people die over the years, generally speaking, when I counsel people, it's things I have intimate knowledge of. I tend not to counsel people about things that I don't have firsthand experience of and I don't have some degree of expertise in. But death is one of these really peculiar phenomenon where if you're counseling someone who's going to die, you're talking them through something that you yourself have not experienced, because if you had, you wouldn't be around to counsel them. And so we have a thing we do. One thing I've noticed is that when people die, obviously I also have friends who've died suddenly. Everything from overdoses to gunshot wounds to car accidents and whatever else you can shake a stick at. But when somebody knows that death is imminent, then I've noticed there's certain things they go through. There's that 5 stages of grief thing. That's just made up pop psychology. There's no actual hard evidence that that's what people do. Somebody just came up with that, and some people like it, and so it became a pop psychology thing that people use as a framework. I don't think it's terrible, but it's not like that's the consensus opinion in the literature that deals with these subjects. There's precisely 5 stages of this. Right? Yeah. But I've noticed, and this is just anecdotal, I've noticed that there's certain things people go through. So one thing is, if you are a new devotee, then you go through a crisis of faith. Death is severe. It challenges your faith. Everything from, I'm afraid of the dark. When Carl Jung used to ask people to think about death, he would ask them to imagine they were in a room all by themselves and there was nothing else around them. And they were just in a completely empty place all alone. Because in his mind, that was the closest you could come to death. And of course, that represents his personal conception of how people think about death. Certainly there are many people in the world who think of death as a joyous experience where you're reunited with God. I remember when my grandfather died and I was counseling him. Bizarrely, I ended up counseling my 99-year-old grandfather when he died about 5 years ago, and my grandmother who died some years prior. That was a wild one. My grandmother and grandfather were living in rural Arizona, just hours outside of Phoenix. And my grandmother told me, I'm going to die today. You have to come out here. And so I jumped on a plane, flew out to Phoenix, rented a car, and drove 3 or 4 hours just out into the middle of nowhere. Like Arizona gets real rural and cactusy really quick. And so I was just at some tiny little town where I don't know why they were living there, but whatever. They probably had good golf or something like that. And I got there and I walked in the door, and within 1 minute of me grabbing my grandmother's hand and telling her I'm here now, she died. Like she was waiting there for me to get there. And I held her hand and I chanted to her, and like 30 seconds later, she died. She was 88. My grandfather was 89. He lived to 99 and a half. He was super fried. He told me he wanted to make it to 100. Died right when he turned 100. Didn't quite make it. Just fell just shy. Anyway, he was a train wreck when his wife of 65 years died. Maybe they were married 70 years. He was I actually had to pick him up in my arms and carry him into the other room and console him like you might a child. And of course I love my grandfather, he was good to me, but in this regard I thought he was quite immature. Because, come on, you've been married for 65 or 70 years. Let go a little bit. And spend some of those years and decades saying goodbye and getting ready to leave this world. Don't just hold on like a teenager up until the bitter end and then come apart at the seams. He was depressed for years about it. I counseled him for almost 10 years, and he was depressed like anything the whole time. And he would say to me, I can't wait till I die. He didn't believe in remember when my grandpa Dick would tell us he couldn't wait to die and see his... It was wild, wasn't it? Of course, my wife is thinking, how romantic. And I'm thinking, come on, man. Cultivate a little detachment along the way. His conception of death, in sharp contrast to Carl Jung's, was that death was him being reunited with Jesus and his wife. I don't know how it works, some kind of love triangle thing they got going on, but somehow he's going to go back to Jesus and also be with his wife again. And there are two people in heaven. It's Jesus and his wife, and they're going to big block party. So Jung's idea of death being this ultimate loneliness really reflects his atheistic, Eurocentric worldview and how he conceived of death. And in fact, for many other people and many other cultures, perhaps the bulk of the world's population, they don't think about death as being this incredible loss. They rather think of it as being a welcome home, a happy event. And that's not just on paper. My grandfather would say to me regularly for 10 years, just praying to Jesus to take me so I can see your grandma again. He didn't have a crisis of faith. At that age, with his upbringing, maybe due to a lack of intelligence or some limited capacity, or he'd worked through it all on his own, he didn't have any more doubts. And so dealing with getting old, being separated from his loved ones, dying, it was still a challenge, but it was not a crisis of faith. Young devotees, 10, 20 years, I've noticed when they get taken away at a young age, they inevitably go through a crisis of faith. They're angry at God, they're afraid. And I think Jung was onto something. Death is the great unknown, if only because you haven't experienced it. Even in our scriptures, we talk about Sarup Siddhi and Siddhi, and we have all these different words for perfection. But then there's Vastu Siddhi, which is when you actually concretely pass away from this world. And even our commentators who regularly see Krishna, you're good. Even our commentators, our tikakars, who regularly see Krishna and envision the deity and enter into a rapturous state of communion with Krishna. Even they say, we cannot speak about Vastu Siddhi because we have not experienced it. Even they admit that there is something unique about the experience of dying that goes beyond even your ecstatic revelatory experiences, your ecstatic experiences in this world. Naika, sit with Varangi. Okay, don't. So I think there is something to Jung's idea of a meditation on death being a meditation on emptiness, because it does represent a threshold that you haven't passed through. Sometimes people want to equate a near-death experience to actually dying. I don't believe they're one and the same. Because they usually talk about a white light or being in the room and watching people. But they don't talk about the full experience of death and transcending this body entirely, because they kind of maybe have a loose tethering that doesn't quite break. They're loosely tethered, and they're sort of like a ship that begins to sail away but still has a rope attached and is pulled back in. So I do think there's some value in Jung's idea that death is this incredibly lonely space that you have to sit and think about and contemplate. Even though he had his own vision of what death consisted of, which does drastically differ from most people's vision. I mean, the bulk of the world's population is religious, and they have a much different conception of what happens when you pass away. But I have found that when young people pass away and they're forced to grapple with their mortality, that they ask questions like, does God exist? Does Krishna love me? Why is this happening to me? Why would this happen to me if God was all good and all powerful? There's various flavors of the crisis. Some of them, you actually wonder, is there something else? Is there a God? Is Krishna God? We call that, I say, the most basic type of crisis of faith. It's an actual question as to whether or not there's something else. And it's natural that when someone's dying, they might have such a question, because it's really happening. It's not theoretical anymore. It's not in the indefinite future. It's, you're dying. It's about to happen. Devotees who've been around for longer don't generally have that doubt. At least that most basic form of the doubt. They got too much time in and too much spiritual experience. They can't deny the existence of the deity. They've worked it out. But then there's other flavors, other variations of that basic doubt, and it's an incompatibility of their death with an all-good and all-powerful God is really what it boils down to. If God existed and was all-powerful, then this wouldn't be happening to me. Why is this being done to me? Why am I being forced to suffer this? And that's not the most basic form. It's a little bit more advanced. It can sometimes lead to atheism, but it also is just working out the kinks in a belief system and figuring out how it's compatible and coherent and is comprehensive, stands up to scrutiny, matches up with your life, overlays on top of your life. Are you guys following this? I'm having a little hard time focusing with just all the energy. And the subject matter is not light. But I'm just going to recap. You making faces at people, Varangi? What's going on? Okay, let's do that. I'm looking at you. It's making it weirder. I see you like talking to somebody and trying to hide from me. That bewilders me even more. I'm not going to completely start again, but I am going to recap. I'm counseling somebody. He's online right now watching. He'll be dead in a month, if not in 3 days. We've been working together for years. He's a good friend of mine. We've never met. In fact, we may meet. I may end up flying out there at some point in the not too distant future. We'll see what happens. But we spend a lot of time on the phone, on FaceTime. We've become quite close. He's 42, with 2 kids, under the age of 5, and he's about to depart this world. It's an interesting position for me to be in because I generally try to only counsel people things that I know personally, usually intimately personally. But death is one of those wild things where if you know it intimately, you're not around to counsel somebody, and so you got to hold their hand as much as you can. Rather than the 5 phases of grief, which I think are a little kitschy, and a little soap box, and a little Cracker Jack box, I found some more generic things that I've seen happen. And one of them is a crisis of faith, either in the existence of God or in the compatibility of your lifestyle or the things which have happened to you, your life events, with an all-good and all-powerful and all-loving deity. I think my man Gopal's gone through a bit of that. I think Jung was onto something with his great unknown. Even our own tradition speaks sparingly about Vastu Siddhi. They give some information about it, but the commentators don't speak about it with the same degree of familiarity they speak about, for instance, seeing Krishna entering into Leela, because they say that that final step is beyond their experience because they haven't gone through it, and therefore they can only describe it or approximate it for you. One thing that Gopal and I have gotten into is we read a section of the Gita together. A specific section, a section I'm going to read with you now. And that's been therapeutic for him. In fact, he asked me to read it to him yesterday. And it's about, I don't know, a dozen verses, give or take. Occurs in the 6th chapter. I'm not going to give a whole introduction separate from what I've already said. But Arjuna asks a question. You know, it's interesting. I'm just going to say this. Everybody should go through a crisis of faith in their life and wonder about whether or not God exists. If your faith is swabhaviki, it's innate. What's up, sweetheart? Okay. Okay. It's like you and Naika doing the same kind of stuff. I think it's really important for everybody to go through a crisis of faith and wonder about whether or not God exists at a certain point. Because if you're born a devotee, and even if you have had faith, thanks, Narayan, and you've had faith for your whole life, what's really happened is you've borrowed your faith from other people, and you're just too ignorant to have ever had doubts. An intelligent person will want to have a reason for believing in something. And they'll have to discover good reasons for believing in divinity. Because you don't see God, which would, of course, nullify free will. So it's a good thing that God isn't just right in front of you at every moment, forcing you to do the right thing like some big police officer in the sky. Such a phenomenon would be incompatible with free will and free choice, which would nullify the possibility of love. There's all sorts of problems with an overly present deity. But you shouldn't believe in something without good reason. And so, well, our book says you should believe it. Well, you shouldn't believe in a book without a good reason. And so figuring out good reasons, logical reasons, discovering powerful evidence for the existence of God is on everybody's plate. And if you believe something just because your grandmother told you something, it's a rather weak platform to use to deal with and navigate the most massive questions of human life. Oh, somebody told me, my parents told me, and I was raised like this, and some book said this or that. That's not very powerful. That's not very sturdy. That's not going to stand up to a lot of kicking of the tires. And inevitably, life does kick your tires. And you see what you're made of. I counsel a lot of devotees who are born devotees. And sometimes they'll say to me, oh, I'm wondering whether God exists or whether Krishna's God. And I'm always ecstatic when they tell me that. I'm super happy. They, of course, oftentimes feel like there's something wrong with them and they're unfaithful or irreverent or bad devotees or cursed or weak or broken. There's something fundamentally wrong with them. But from my side, some young person I'm counseling or some second generation devotee who was born a member of our tribe, when they say, I'm wondering whether or not God exists or whether Krishna's God, why we believe in Krishna particularly, why is Krishna blue, why does Krishna play a flute, why is our conception of God more legitimate than anybody else's conception of God? I love those questions. Because to me that means they've gone from a child's faith where they just blindly follow what their elders are doing, and now they're going through a process of making that faith their own and stabilizing it so it'll work. It'll last them for a lifetime. I'm happy because now I'm dealing with an adult who's asking all the right questions, and then when they get good answers, they'll be able to appreciate them. Do you guys follow that? And we got really good answers to those questions. Specifically, I've got really good answers to those questions. And so it's a happy day. Same way challenges him to an arm wrestling match because he already knows what the conclusion will be. He's got a lot of confidence in his abilities. Similarly, I'm like that. I can't wait for the opportunity to put my arm on the table because this is exactly and precisely my field of expertise. Arguing systematically and logically for the existence of God. My friend Gopal doesn't need that. He worked that stuff out before I met him. So we haven't had to go down that road, although I'm really comfortable doing that. But why is he dying of cancer and abandoning his children? His children are going to grow up with huge issues in life of being abandoned by their father, and the incredible suffering he's undergone, and he's checking out so early, and he just became a devotee and just got really inspired and just got initiated, and now it's all being ripped away from him. He made a couple of babies. He never probably would have had kids had he known this was going to happen to him, and now the whole thing is just, that stuff's been weighing on him. And I can't see how that wouldn't. Again, if you weren't just a blind follower or mentally impaired, his questions seem to be some of the most natural questions in the world. And they're kind of a variation of like a why me question, and why do bad things happen to good people? Why is there suffering in the world if God's all good and all powerful? It's really a variation of the problem of evil specific to your circumstance. And everybody has to go through that. Unless you're old. If you're old, it's different. I had a good life. I had my run. I've made my peace with it. I've come to terms with it. Sometimes old people freak out too and have these questions, but not always. Especially old devotees who've spent a lifetime of devotion. They're just fearless when grappling with death. It's mind-blowing sometimes watching a great Vaishnava leave this world. The clarity and the focus and the intensity and the devotion and the purity and the love and the generosity and the acceptance is just miraculous. I don't even want to say other religions can't have the same thing. I haven't experienced, watching great Catholic saints leave their bodies, or Orthodox saints leave their bodies. I've only experienced people in our tribe leaving this world, and it's just been stunningly beautiful and cathartic. To see their boldness and the way they're able to let go of this world with such confidence and assurity and peace. Everybody gets there. It's wild. The moment before they die, people become calm. Everybody gets there. But you'll see devotees and they never falter. It's like pitching a no-hitter. It's just a perfect 10 the whole way through, whereas most people have a few twists and turns to get to that place. So Gopal's young. He hasn't been a devotee that long. It's been rough for him. And I was supposed to call him right before class, so I couldn't. And so I just decided to call him during class. And so I knew he'd be in the class, so he asked if I could call him for 5 minutes before class. And so now we're just having a conversation. You guys are all here for it, but he's also here. Anyway, we have this section of the Gita, and it speaks to him strongly. I know because I thought he would find meaning in it, and he's brought it back up to me again and again over the years, that he wants to talk about it, and he wants to read it. Yesterday he just had me read it to him. We wouldn't even talk about it. He wanted to hear me read it to him, this section. So I'm going to read it to you guys. I'm going to talk a little bit about it because I think that this is a really... anyway, I think it's a really beautiful section of the Gita. So it starts off, and Arjuna says, the system of yoga, which you have summarized, appears impractical and unendurable to me. I really like this statement from Arjuna because remember how I mentioned that I think it's natural to have doubts, and when you move from a blind faith to a real faith, it's natural to have doubts? Well, we find that Arjuna is also not just blindly accepting what Krishna says, but he's thinking about what Krishna says in relationship to his life and the real world. And when Krishna says something which he finds to be untenable or unreasonable, he challenges God. It's far out. It's an interesting reaction. Normally you expect, you hit the deck and you offer oblations or flowers or words of praise and feelings of unworthiness or humility. There's kind of a standard sort of beatific moments, the way they're described in religious texts. But Arjuna's reaction to Krishna's quite beautiful monologue in the 6th chapter, it's so many beautiful verses, is to say, I don't think this is practical. I don't think this is going to work. Right? It's kind of a wild reaction to have. And Arjuna doesn't just say, doesn't make sense to me, which is kind of a lame statement to make. That doesn't make sense to me because you're giving the person nothing to negotiate with. You're just forcing them to go. Like if somebody says, I'll pay you $10,000 for that, and you go, that doesn't work for me. Walk away from the negotiation. They need to come back at you. You can't negotiate with yourself. And so if Arjuna was merely to say, I don't approve of this, this doesn't work for me, that would be problematic. But he says, why? Because the mind is restless and unsteady. So Krishna was recommending meditation. Arjuna is saying the mind is too restless, and therefore I don't think I'm going to be able to hold my mind like a lamp in a windless place, like the flame of a lamp in a windless place. And so he's offering some evidence. We have a mind, the mind's unsteady, it's got likes and dislikes, various thoughts, you don't have full control over it. Now you're telling me to fully control my mind, and that's going to be how I'm going to transcend this world, and I don't have the ability to do that. So he's offering some evidence for why he finds the system impractical. He's giving Krishna a stalking horse so Krishna can respond. He doubles down. And in Sanskrit, when you double down and say the same thing twice, it means you're really emotional about it. So Arjuna is quite emotional. He's looking to Krishna for answers. Krishna's recommending this process. Arjuna finds it to be unreasonable because of the weakness of the mind. And then he doubles down and says, the mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong, and to subdue it, I think, is more difficult than controlling the wind. Krishna responds back, and he says, it's undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but it's possible by practice and detachment, abhyas and vairagya, which are two standard terms used in the yoga literature to designate how yoga is accomplished. There is practice, abhyas, repetition of trying to control the mind, focus on one point, and then there's vairagya or dispassion, which allows you to continue with that practice despite the difficulties. Practice without detachment doesn't long endure. You tried a couple times, it doesn't work. Detachment by itself is mere stoicism. and it doesn't get you very far. And so you have to both put skin in the game and try, and at the same time persevere and be a little detached, because you're not going to be successful right away. Like a child learning how to walk. If you watch a child learn how to walk, it doesn't come easy. They have to try hundreds of times, over and over again. And so Krishna comes back at them and says, yeah, it's tough, but you can do it. Journey of a lifetime begins with a single step. Journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, something like that. Essentially telling Arjuna to pull himself up by the bootstraps, and it might be difficult, but you can still do it. That doesn't satisfy Arjuna, and he gets down to the real heart of things, to the essence of things. Krishna says, for one whose mind is unbridled, self-realization is difficult work, but he whose mind is controlled, who strives by appropriate means, is assured of success. That's my opinion. And so Krishna doubles down. I gave you a legitimate system. It works. You got to work it. You got to put some skin in the game. You got to try. It's not going to be overnight. You're not going to be an overnight success. You're going to have to put some time in. This isn't particularly astounding. This was just the intro. Then Arjuna lays out his actual issue. Arjuna lays out his real issue. And he says, what is the destination of the unsuccessful transcendentalist who in the beginning takes to the process of self-realization with faith, but who later desists due to worldly mindedness and thus does not attain perfection? Does not such a person, bewildered from the path of transcendence, fall away from both spiritual and material success and perish like a riven cloud with no position in any sphere? This is my doubt, and I ask you to dispel it completely. But for you, no one is to be found who can destroy my doubt. It's a nice way of asking someone for help. There's no one else who can help me. Like Princess Leia says, Obi-Wan, you are my only hope. And that's the beginning of Star Wars. It's a tactic to motivate somebody. You let them know they're the one and only. There's nobody else. There's no second string. There's nobody else who's going to step up. Arjuna's doubt here is twofold. On one hand, he's wondering, what if I try to the best of my ability, but I don't make it? Or what if I try and I fall away from the practice? There's two different phenomena. Imagine if you ran a race and you died before you crossed the finish line. Imagine if you ran a race and you stopped running the race and you left the track. It's two different scenarios. There's a certain romanticism about the one scenario where at least you died trying. I think 50 Cent wrote a book, or maybe a song, or there's a movie, Get Rich or Die Trying. And so, at least there seems to be some nobility in that full-hearted commitment to what you're doing, that you're either going to succeed or die trying. I remember it was the 5th round of a famous title fight some years ago, and the champion he'd gotten rocked and almost finished in the previous round. And you can see him mouthing the words to himself at the start of the 5th round, I'm ready to die. getting himself psyched up for he actually won the fight. And so getting himself psyched up, I'm prepared to die. I'm prepared, saying to himself, muttering to himself, not for anybody else to hear, but they caught it, and somebody like a lip reader figured it out. And then when you watch it and you know what he said and you know what he's saying, but he's just muttering to himself, I'm prepared to die. Like he's walking back into battle. And there was something noble about that level of commitment. There's that famous fossil in Pompeii of the mother holding her baby. The lava came. She couldn't stop it, and so the last thing she did was hold her kid. The kid died too. They were turned into a fossil, but she just, it's anything she could do to protect her child right up until it was over. So Arjuna's got both doubts. What if I blow it and I fall away? And alternatively, what if I try for my whole life and I'm not able to make it? I think once you deal with basic questions like a belief in God and a conception of divinity, which are extremely important and are the foundation for everything that comes subsequently. I think once you do that, everybody else's questions ultimately distill down to this question. I think in this sense, Arjuna is the everyman, and he's asking the most fundamental question of the devout. What if I fall short? What if I fail? What if I can't do it? I want to try. I want to dedicate my life to this highest cause. I've been convinced that this is the most worthwhile thing to dedicate my life to, but what if I don't make it? In this sense, I think that Arjuna's question here exemplifies the basic doubt of the theist once he's settled the fundamental question of theism. This is the next level of doubt which plagues the devout. The next level of doubt for the devout. And I find devotees do experience this. And it's stunning to me, and beautifully stunning, that this gets addressed in the Gita. And Krishna says, a devotee engaged in auspicious activities never meets with destruction in this world or the next. One who does good, my friend, is never overcome by evil. That my friend is tata. Tata in Sanskrit means my dear. It's an affectionate term which is used oftentimes by parents to talk to their children. It could just as easily be rendered as my child. It's the only time in the whole Gita where Krishna speaks to Arjuna with a term of pure endearment like this. You have these terms of endearment: my beloved, my love, my child. Those would be terms of endearment in the English language. And so throughout the whole Gita, Krishna never uses such a term. He uses epithets that glorify Arjuna or challenge Arjuna in various ways. But Krishna's response here is to speak to Arjuna and say, my child, my beloved, my dear, you don't have to worry. If you dedicate your life to a higher cause, you don't have to worry. After the unsuccessful yogi, you never stopped. or you walked away. Really, this is for the people who walked away. After many, many years of enjoyment on the planets of pious living entities, is born into a family of righteous people or into a family of rich aristocracy. On taking such a birth, or if you never give up. So that's if you walk away, good things will happen to you and you'll have another chance. And if you never walk away, you'll take your birth in a family of devotees who are surely great in wisdom. Such a birth is rare in this world. On taking such a birth, you'll revive the divine consciousness of your previous life and again make further progress and achieve complete success. By virtue of that divine consciousness of your previous life, you'll automatically become attracted to yogic principles even without seeking them. Such an inquisitive transcendentalist stands always above the ritualistic principles of scriptures. And when you engage yourself with sincere endeavor in making further progress, being washed of all contamination, then ultimately achieving perfection after many, many births of practice, you'll finally achieve the supreme goal. Now, for the faithful, people who believe in our sacred texts, this may be enough in and of itself to satisfy you, because it says so in our sacred book. But I think it's important that we don't just accept things that are said in sacred books that don't make any sense. And so I'd like to point out for everybody, please listen very carefully to this. If you're able to reasonably believe in and come to the conclusion that it's eminently reasonable and logical, and it makes perfect sense to believe in an all-good and all-powerful divinity, then this would have to be the structure of the universe. Because an all-good deity would see the best in you and appreciate whatever you've done and always leave the door open and give you another chance. And an all-powerful entity would have the ability to actually do that and to construct the universe where that was the reality. An all-good deity would always want to leave the door open and give you a second chance and see the good in what you've done. And an all-powerful deity could, in fact, accomplish that desire. Therefore, this understanding of the structure of the universe is the only worldview that's compatible with an all-good, all-powerful deity. An eternal hell, an eternal failure, one chance, no more. Those worldviews are fundamentally incompatible with an all-good and all-powerful deity, no matter what book they show up in. And so we don't necessarily have to put our faith in this precise schema. If you just really rigorously understand that God exists and is all good and all powerful, and you think it through, this is the world you live in, independent of it being stated in the Gita. With this worldview, we can thank you. I want to have that big finish, but my mind has to be tranquil for the words to come. With this worldview, we can navigate life. We can grow old. We can die. We can suffer loss, betrayal, everything in between. Because really what we're doing is we are approaching and turning towards divinity in our life. And with this powerful promise and awareness of the nature of an all-good, all-powerful deity and the world that would emanate from such an all-good and all-powerful deity, we can just with absolute confidence, push forward, chant our rounds, follow the principles, live an auspicious life, take the high road, be our best self, see the good in others, slay dragons. Live a profound life, always striving to be our best self, to stay chaste, to stay faithful, to ever be deepening our spiritual practice. And whatever stands in our way isn't going to stand for long. And if we pass away, no problem. We'll get another shot. If it takes lifetimes, what does it really matter? We're approaching the infinite. It doesn't matter if it takes lifetimes. So what? What's there really to be afraid of? Ultimately, and this is the final point I'll make, once you reasonably come to the conclusion that God exists and dispel the natural doubts that everyone will have about the existence of God if they think about it hard enough, once you work through that, there's no more fear in life. Once you understand that the world was created by an all-good, all-powerful deity, that's it. Once you've understood, you might still have to do some further thinking and philosophizing, but that's it. That bedrock will give you everything you could ever want. Every statement in our scripture becomes an automatic necessity. There's no extra thing they're asking you to believe. This is all just the consequence of that people have actually thought it through, what it says about the nature of reality if you believe in an all-good, all-powerful deity. Therefore, we can focus on that one basic thing, and as a result of having well understood that and coming to terms with that and coming to peace with that and achieving success in that big, basic question, everything else will get resolved automatically. It evaporates upon scrutiny. It all gets worked out. You live a fearless life. You live a life of confidence. Nothing can hold you back. You always get to move forward. The world becomes a very friendly place. You'll find infinite inspiration to follow, to move forward, to give, to love, to grow, to deepen. And then these verses are like a gentle rain, washing away a little bit of residue and making everything beautiful and fresh. And so devotees always wind up on top, just like my friend Gopal's going to. He's going to rise to the occasion. Everything's going to work out for him. And if we put in our time, everything will work out for us too. And I want to try to just highlight the simplicity of our process and our belief system, and how the things we work on and talk about, how far-reaching the implications of them are, and how you can do one thing and do everything, and resolve one dilemma and resolve every dilemma, and see one truth and see all truths, and clear one doubt and clear all other doubts. And there might be some further discussion, and there might be some need for verses like this, but they become so obvious, and you become filled with an enthusiasm which never diminishes. And the question of, what happens, after will I make it back in one lifetime? What does it matter? I'm going to make it back. What does it matter? Krishna will take care of me. He's all good. He's all powerful. Of course he'll take care of me. Look at this life. Krishna's taking care of me now. I don't have to wonder if he's going to take care of me in the next lifetime. Look at this lifetime and how Krishna's taking care of me now. Open your eyes. See it. Why have any doubts? Be peaceful. Sally forth. Slay the dragon. And the next one. Okay. We'll do a little kirtan, have prasad. Thank you so much for coming. Hare Krishna.